we are very excited to introduce to you Dr. Jaimin Patel from Lincoln University Cooperative Extension. He is located on our main campus in Jefferson City, Missouri, and he is our state plant pathologist, and he is here to talk to us today about tomato fungal diseases. Dr. Patel?
Thank you, Son, for a nice introduction. Good afternoon, everybody. How are you doing? Good. Does everybody has this brochure? So you can go along with me as I present. First of all, I'm here to provide you some information, as well as I'm here to get some information from you. I'm relatively new in Missouri, so I'm still learning the Missouri agriculture. But I hope to provide good information, and I hope to get some information from you. So during my presentation, I'll be talking about 6 different diseases, and that is caused by fungi. The first 4 diseases are caused by fungi, and the last 2 diseases are caused by a pathogen which is fungus-like pathogen, but it is not fungi. It is called oomycetes. There are, like about a few decades ago, those were called fungi, but based on recent analysis, we found that it is not really a fungi. It is a oomycetes. Now, these are the diseases that I'm going to talk about because I think that those are common in Missouri. But I may be wrong, as I mentioned that I'm still learning the Missouri agriculture. And you may tell me that maybe there are a few other diseases that I have not talked about. I already know that there are some diseases like powdery mildew, gray mold, southern blight. Those are not listed here, and I'm not going to talk about it, but I'll be happy to provide you more information about it, either here or in personal conversation as you feel appropriate. So let's talk about early blight of tomato. Early blights of tomato affects both fruit as well as leaves. And when any disease affects the fruit, that is the most important because it directly affects your final production, and that means it impacts your financial situation. But infecting leaves are also important because if leaves are not there, plant is not capable to produce enough flowers and fruits eventually. So you need to protect leaves as well. So what are the symptoms of the early blight? Well, initially it appears as irregular black or brown spots on older leaves. It starts generally from the lower part of the old leaves, and then it expands to show series of concentric rings. As you see, some concentric rings here. That is very typical of the early blight disease that you won't find with the late blight. And after some time, as disease advances, the leaf tissue surrounding these concentric rings, can show the yellowing. As you can see, a little bit yellowing. You may not find that at initial stage. That was for the leaf, and it also infects on the fruit, as I said earlier. And fruit also has a concentric ring, but mostly where fruit attaches to the pedicel. And this after the fruit is infected, it doesn't have a capacity to hold with the plant, so it may fall off from the plant. Also, there is a possibility of injury due to sun because as more leaves get infected, leaves will fall off and fruits will be directly exposed to the sunlight. So it get sun scald injury. So how do you manage the early blight? First of all, I think in previous presentation, one of the previous presentation, particularly about the bacterial disease of tomato, it was in another room. where the presenter mentioned that you need to care about the three things: host, pathogen, and environment when you're looking at the disease. Disease occurrence is not possible without these three factors. If there is no host, there is no disease. If there is a host but there is no pathogen, there is no chance of disease. And if there is both host and pathogen is there, but if there is no environment, disease cannot occur. So you always have to remember host, pathogen, and environment. Okay. So here we are looking at early blight disease caused by Alternaria solani, which is fungi. Tomato is our host, and the environment could be anything. It's the rain, humidity, temperature, even the other conditions like dew and all those things. So here, the first point says no overhead irrigation. It's a part of environment. The reason is that most fungi, they germinate in the presence of water layer. As far as they find certain duration of water layer in the form of raindrop or irrigation drop, whatever it is, they will germinate. And once they germinate, they will penetrate into the plant tissue. If they do not have water surface for a certain period of time, they will not be able to germinate unless they are directly on the top of the stomata, which is the opening of the plant. So always be careful that you do not provide overhead irrigation, and by doing that, you will not allow pathogen to germinate. Second thing is increase the, sorry about that. Increase the plant spacing. Again, the purpose is to reduce the water layer, because more plant spacing, there is more aeration and less duration of water layer on the plant. Use the disease-resistant variety. Now this goes back to the host, because if host is resistant, there is a less chance of disease occurring. If host is susceptible, there is obviously the disease will occur. You can check several disease-resistant variety options at Cornell website, and this is the website. They have resistant varieties for heirloom type or different kind of greenhouse type or high tunnel tomato varieties. You can also apply fungicides if resistant varieties are not available. Whenever you choose to apply fungicide, make sure that the fungicide application occur before the disease that you see. Once disease is there, it is not gonna work, or you will just waste your time and money applying fungicides. And for type of fungicides, you can check the Midwest Vegetable Production Guide, which is freely available, and also the website later on. There are several options available. The second disease is anthracnose on the fruit. This is a very common disease almost everywhere in the US. It is caused by a fungus called Colotrichum coccidis, and this disease generally appears in the wet weather and warm conditions, and it spreads to the splashing water or in rain conditions. Generally, it starts with like a little bit depressed skin on the tomato, and you can see here, like in this photograph or here, and as disease advances, you can see a black spot in the center of that depressed tomato skin, and you can probably see here, you see little black spot here. That is a structure produced by the fungi called sclerosia, and that is just beneath the skin. That black structure is produced, and that helps fungi to continue to reproduce and infect even more tomatoes around them. How do you manage the anthracnose? Again, This, as I mentioned, that this is sprayed through water splashing or rain. So you should avoid tomatoes touching to the ground or touching to the rainwater or irrigation water. And to do so, you generally have raised bed or the well-drained land. And then try to rotate the plant for longer period of time, generally for 3 to 4 years with non-solanaceous crops, which is not in the same family as tomato. And then that will help to reduce the buildup of this particular pathogen, Colotriticum coccodus. There are several fungicides available for this disease, protection against this disease. And this can be again found in Cornell website. They have WageMed website, and they have a blog as well. You can also find in our Midwest Commercial Veg Production Guide for growers. And I know several fungicides options available, but again, the main thing to remember is you apply fungicides before disease occurrence. Another disease is called Septoria leaf spot. It is caused by Septoria lycopersicii. Symptoms consist of, well, first of all, this disease mainly occurs on the leaves rather than on fruit, which is good if you do not have a severe disease. But generally, this starts with like a spotting and wilting of tomato foliage. And generally, it starts on the lower or older leaves. And you can see circular spots with dark brown margins and have a tan to gray center if you have like a magnifying glass. And if you look at this individual spots, you can see a gray spot. And that is an indication of the Septoria leaf spot. That gray spot indicates a reproductive structure of the fungi. And as there are more spots occurring on the leaves become yellowing, as you see here and here compared to like few spots here. Okay, so numerous lesions will cause yellowing, and then eventually leaves will wither, dry, and fall off the plant. And again, as I mentioned, fruit infection is very rare in this case. This pathogen overwinters on infected tomato or plant debris, and therefore you would like to have a crop rotation with non-solanaceous crops, just like with anthracnose disease, which will help to reduce the buildup of this pathogen. But when you do that, you also need to make sure that you don't just rotate your crop with non-solanaceous crop, but you have to make sure that the weeds that are belonging to solanaceous family, you also take care of those weeds. Otherwise, you think that, well, I rotated with non-solanaceous major crop, but you have weeds that will carry the pathogens. Do you have a question? Yes.
When we were over there about the bacterial diseases, like between bacterial speck and Septoria leaf spot, can you tell the difference just by your eyes, or you have to look under magnification?
So bacterial speck occurs on tomato as well. Right. For Septoria, it's a rare on the fruit. Okay, it mostly occurs on the leaves. So there are some major differences that most of the time you can recognize. Okay, there are certain diseases other than Septoria or bacterial speck, you have to send samples to the diagnostic laboratory, but in this case it's easy, you know. Again, this pathogen can stay there in your facility, whether it's a field greenhouse or high tunnel for long period of time. You also need to make sure that the if there are infected leaves like this are there, you generally avoid entering the facility in the field, high tunnel or greenhouse when the leaves are wet, because at that time there is a production of the spores, and if you just enter, you unknowingly carry or spread the pathogen from one plant to another plant. So you don't want to enter, particularly in the morning when there is a leaves are wet. As again, long periods of high humidity, high temperatures, and leaf wetness are ideal for this pathogen. How do you manage the septoria leaf spot? Again, try to remove the infected plants as soon as you are done with your tomato harvesting. Do not think that we harvested the tomatoes, we are done with the crop, because it will give you trouble next season if you do not take care of them this season, at the end of the season. Start with the disease-free seeds or disease-free transplants. Try to rotate with less susceptible or non-susceptible crops, particularly non-selaneous crop. And then make sure that rotation occurs for longer period of time, generally for 2 to 3 years. Also make sure that weeds are not susceptible in that area. And some examples of weeds are nightshade, Jameson weed, and horse nettle. Try to have a good spacing between the plants, so that way there is a good aeration and leaf wetness is not there for longer duration. Hand picking infected leaves will reduce the number of spores. So as you scout your field, if you suspect that there is a septoria occurring on certain leaves, particularly start watching the older leaves, because it targets older leaves first than the younger leaves. So you can pick them and remove from the plant. But you should also be careful that when you pick the leaves, don't just pick it up and go to another plant and pick it up and again keep going. Pick it up, keep the bag, plastic bag, leave it inside. Otherwise, you unknowingly actually spreading the disease rather than preventing the disease. Okay, so always keep in the plastic bag, seal it before you take another step in the field or greenhouse. Again, as I mentioned in previous slide, stay out of growing areas when foliage is wet. That way you don't unintentionally carry the pathogen with you. Water early in the day, so as sun comes out, foliage will dry very quickly. There are a few fungicides available, and these are only few handful of fungicides. More fungicides can be found in the Midwest Vegetable Commercial Guide booklet. Another disease is called Fusarium wilt, and this disease is caused by Fusarium oxyspori, Forma specialis lycopersicii. The symptoms includes that the first sign or first symptoms is, as you see in the picture, one side of the plant will wilt or will show the yellowing first time. Also, another very typical of this Fusarium wilt is that during the daytime you feel like plant is dying, but when you look at the same plant during the night time, the plant looks perfectly fine. It is normal. Okay, that is an indication that it is probably infected by the Fusarium wilt or Fusarium oxysporum. But at the advanced stage, the whole plant soon will turn yellow and probably wither and die. Another best thing to confirm this disease is to break off the lower part of the stem. So if you break off, and if you look at the stem, you will see this kind of like a discoloration, brownish discoloration. That is another indication that it is caused by the Fusarium species. Sometimes it is also on the outer side of the skin, as you can see some streaks, but this is more common than this one. Also, this pathogen survives longer duration in the soil. So you have to, once you found that in your system or facility or in the field, you have to rotate with other non-susceptible crops. Sometime, when you bring the transplants from nursery, you look at the plants. If there are 100 plants, you check all plants by looking at them and see if there is a one plant even infected, don't bring or don't buy from there. Because if there is one plant infected, there are chances that other will get infected. This pathogen generally moves through the vascular system, and that's why you see this discoloration. So, and that's another reason why you see one side of the plant wilted first, because one side of the vascular system is blocked by this pathogen. But as this is advanced, the entire plant will become yellow and will die eventually. And this disease is more common in warm weather and acidic soil. The way to manage this disease is definitely you choose the resistant varieties. Look for the disease-free transplants. Get the clean equipment to work with, whether it's stakes or trails or whatever it is. Make sure it is clean and not carrying any pathogen from last year. The rotation is very common for most fungal diseases, and as I mentioned, this pathogen can survive longer duration than other soil-borne pathogens. This can even go 4 or 5 years or even longer. So longer the rotation, better for the healthy tomato production for you. So in this case, 4 to 5 year rotation is recommended. Also avoid excessive nitrogen because it actually promotes the Fusarium wilt disease. This disease likes to occur in the, actually you can raise the pH to 7 because like this disease occurs in acidic soil. So if you make it to neutral, it will help avoid this disease. Now this disease is caused by fungal-like pathogen. It is not fungi. It is called Buckeye rot, caused by pathogen called Phytophthora species. And there are actually 3 species that are known to cause this disease. One is Phytophthora capsicii, another is Phytophthora nicotiana, and I think third one is Phytophthora drexleri. This disease occurs on both green as well as ripe fruit. And initially, it starts with the brown color lesion or spot, and as disease advances, you can see kind of a concentric rings where you can see light and dark brown circles, which can, you can clearly recognize this kind of rings. And then these lesions are generally tough or firm and smooth, rather than other disease where you feel that this is disease and these are soft tissue. They can become soft, but in the later advanced stage. But at the initial stage, they will be firm at the initial level. They are more common in warm and wet weather and sprayed by surface water and splashing rains. Um, and they also spread, or they are more prevalent again in the high humidity because they allow the pathogen to produce spores. As you can see, the white color, that is actually the spores. Without high humidity, you only see the brownish discoloration where there is no high humidity. So if you want to confirm this disease, whether you have a buckeye rot or not, what you do is you pick the suspected fruit, which is the brownish color or maybe some concentric rings. What you do is take a damp tissue or wet tissue, put them in the plastic bag with the fruit, and after 24 hours, come back and check. If it has this whitish powdery growth, that is an indication that you have a buckeye rot caused by this one of those 3 Phytophthora species. So how do you manage the buckeye rot? Again, as this disease is spread by water or irrigation water or rain or the water moving on the soil surface, you want to make sure that fruits do not touch the soil. You can do by several methods. Try to give a support to your plant using stakes. You can use the plastic mulch so they don't directly touch to the soil. Or try to avoid too much irrigation at the soil level. Also use the well-drained soil, so that way you don't have much water flowing or water around the plant. Rotate again with the non-solanaceous crops, and as I said, mulch the plant to reduce the contact with the soil. Another disease is called lead blight. Now this disease, it is caused by the same genus called Phytophthora, but a different species. So lead blight and the buckeye rot caused by the same genus, Phytophthora. It's just a different species caused them. Now this disease, if you have this disease in your production system, you cannot miss it, okay? Particularly when you have a cool and wet weather, you will notice it. Even if you don't want to notice, you will notice it. It's that terrible disease. Luckily, in Missouri, I don't see in last 10 years, which is very good. I did see in Illinois, in Kansas, and in surrounding states, but luckily we did not have this, which is very good. Because once we have cool and wet weather and this pathogen, within a short period of time, I would say less than a week, entire field will be wiped out. Okay, so although I know that it is not common in Missouri, but if it even occurs 1 year, you will have nothing in the field. Is that terrible disease? Is that? So again, it is caused by Phytophthora infestans. It infects almost every part of the plant. Leaves, fruit, twigs or stems, all parts. You can see here leaves are infected. You can see even the little twigs, that is also infected. The fruit is also infected. So it affects most parts of the plant. It starts with the dark brown blotches, which is generally not restricted by the major leaf veins. It has a brown and circular spots, and that can be seen on the fruits, which can be softer. So in the buckeye rot, it is not soft, whereas here, it can become softer. And then there is a white powdery growth, which is also an indication of production of pathogen spores in the wet conditions. Again, when there is a cool and wet weather, this will spread like exponentially in the field. If you are bringing the transplants in the field or your production system, make sure that those transplants are pathogen-free, because those will help pathogen to spread from one plant to another plant. This pathogen is airborne, meaning that spores spread from one plant to another plant by air, air currents, or if you move, you will carry with you and it will land on another healthy plants to infect. This pathogen produces like tons of spores when there is a wet, humid condition. So when that condition is present, and if you notice that your neighboring farmers or county has this disease, you want to spray chemicals before it reaches to your system. This is, as I mentioned, this disease has a capacity to destroy your field within just a short period of time, probably in a week or less than a week. So you don't want to make sure that you have pesticide applied on your crop. The good thing is that when there is a dry weather, even plant is infected, this pathogen cannot no longer damage the tomato plants, because it will stop their reproduction system. But as soon as they find the cool and wet condition, it will start their war against you, you know. So how do you manage? The very first thing is that try to get the resistant varieties. And there are plenty of resistant varieties available. You can refer to the Cornell WedgeMed web page. However, some resistant varieties may be more or less effective, because this particular pathogen has several clonal lineages, meaning that same species, but it is different types of species. So one variety may be severely infected by the same species, whereas the another variety may be less severely infected, because those are infected by different clonal lineage pathogen. So that's why you need to make sure that what kind of lineage is present in your state or in your county. And it is tricky, so you may need to send it to the diagnostic laboratory. Also, make sure that you destroy all your cull piles before the growing season. So you don't wait until the next season comes up. Also, when you're bringing in the transplants, make sure those are disease-free and not infected with the lead blight disease. Scout the field or your system probably every second or third days. If you find any infected plants, try to remove as soon as possible. Again, because this disease spreads very quickly in cool and wet weather conditions. You can again download this freely available Midwest Vegetable Production Guide at this website. It's very easy to download. It has a lot of information from many vegetables and management options available. Another important thing, as I mentioned, in last 10 years, we did not have lead blight problem, but because of the importance of this disease, or the way how quickly it destroys the plant, you have to keep track of the disease. This disease generally comes from the southern parts of the U.S. because it cannot survive in the cold weather. So every spring in Florida or Texas region, there is always presence. But as we start planting in Missouri or in Alabama or wherever from southern side, it starts to move from southern part to the northern part. So you can track the pathogen movement by going through this website called usablight.org and check on the outbreak map. If you find that this disease is present in your county, then you start applying the fungicide. So that way you do not waste your time, you do not waste also money for applying fungicides. Okay. What are the major differences between the buckeye rot and the lead blight? Both are caused by Phytophthora species, but there are major differences that can help you differentiate without even sending samples to the diagnostic lab. The buckeye rot has a concentric rings on the fruit, which you will not find on the fruits infected with lead blight. Buckeye rot affects only on the fruits, whereas lead blight affects most parts of the plant. Buckeye rot generally occurs on the fruits that is touching on the soil. It will not affect the fruit which is away from the soil, whereas lead blight affects almost every fruit or any fruits anywhere located on the plant. Buckeye rot will occur in warm and wet weather, whereas lead blight will occur in cool and wet conditions. So you can see there are several characteristic difference to differentiate easily these two major diseases. With that, that was the end of my presentation. And if you have any question, I will be glad to answer that. Yes.
What you were referring to as buckeye rot, is the other name of that is the early blight?
No. That is different disease and caused by different pathogens. Early blight is caused by fungi, Alternaria solani. Buckeye rot is caused by oomycetes. It's caused by Phytophthora species. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Those trichogamma fungi, are those beneficial for applying to the soil, or is there a natural way to get that instead of buying, because it's pretty expensive stuff?
Well, unless you are a plant pathologist, you can get it by yourself, because you have to isolate, you have to make sure that you get it pure, because in soil there are like tons of different kinds of microorganisms. Even as a plant pathologist, we have to sometimes go through several procedures to identify that this is the really trichoderma and nothing else. And that's one of the reasons it might be costly. Yeah.
Any other questions? All right, let's give Dr. Patel a hand.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.